They said, Monaco glittered because the sea wanted to worship it, each wave curling like applause beneath the cliffs of Monte Carlo. But for Dr. Amara Collins, that glow was a lie. Beneath the polished marble and champagne light, she felt the suffocating weight of perfection, a paradise curated for people who pretended to have no scars. And tonight, standing before the mirror in a penthouse high above Port Hercules, she finally saw the truth. She was becoming one of them, silent, smaller, erased. If you've ever looked in the mirror and wondered when you started disappearing, you'll understand her story. And if you want to walk with her through what happens next, through betrayal, awakening, and rebirth, stay until the end. Make sure you follow, like, and share so that more people hear the voice of a woman who refused to stay quiet. Now, back to Monaco. The night air tasted of salt and secrets. Below, the harbor glittered with yachts that cost more than the museums Amara used to research in. She adjusted her silk gown, too tight, too white, chosen by someone who didn't understand that her skin was the only gold this city couldn't buy. Behind her, the sound of polished shoes echoed like punctuation. Nervous? Nate Whitaker asked, his voice warm but practiced, the tone of a man who'd never been told no. I'm fine, she lied. He smiled the way powerful men do when they think they've already won. You'll do great. Just remember, it's an investors' event, not a debate on culture. A subtle cut disguised as advice. Amara nodded because that's what she did now. Nodded, smiled, vanished. She used to lecture at Columbia University about how architecture carried memory, how every arch and column held the ghost of a hand that built it. But somewhere between her PhD and this penthouse, she had traded history for luxury, conviction for comfort. The city outside didn't help. Monaco wasn't built for people like her. It was designed for the illusion of perfection, for people who could afford to buy silence. And Nate was its favorite son. White, handsome, American old money reinvented as tech wealth, the kind of man magazines called visionary. Amara met him 3 years ago at a heritage conference in Paris. He'd listened to her speak about North African design influences in European cathedrals, then whispered afterward, "You make history sound like seduction." It had felt electric, dangerous, flattering. No one had ever looked at her brilliance like it was art before. Now she understood. He didn't want her voice. He wanted the reflection of himself in her success. Her phone buzzed. A message from Aunt Geneva, the one person who never cared about Nate's world. Remember who you were before they told you who to be. Amara stared at it until the words blurred, somewhere between the champagne invitations and the whispered insults about being too bold, too visible. She had forgotten. Tonight was another gala, another room where she'd stand beside him, smiling for cameras that would never quite capture her correctly under their lights. Every flash seemed to bleach her out. Every introduction reduced her to context. Dr. Collins, Nate's partner, from New York, of course. Isn't she fascinating? And yet, something inside her stirred, an ache, an ember. She thought of the paper she'd been writing before she moved here, the one that challenged the idea that Europe's beauty was built in isolation. The draft still sat unfinished in a folder titled Inheritance. "Ready?" Nate asked, his reflection behind hers like a ghost in the mirror. She forced a smile. Always. But as he turned away, her gaze lingered on her own reflection. The way the light caught the curve of her cheek, the depth of her tone, the defiance that hadn't completely died. The gown might have been his choice, but the woman inside it still belonged to herself. Maybe beauty wasn't about fitting in. Maybe it was about refusing to disappear. Maybe, just maybe, this city needed to see what it had been pretending not to notice. The elevator doors opened with a chime. Amara stepped inside, the scent of jasmine following her like memory. Downstairs, cameras would flash, and champagne would flow, and Nate would talk about innovation while holding her hand like an accessory. But for the first time in years, Amara wasn't thinking about survival. She was thinking about the moment she'd finally stopped performing. Outside, the Mediterranean stretched infinite and dark, a mirror for anyone brave enough to look into it. Amara whispered to her reflection on the glass, "Let them see me." It was a prayer, a warning, and a promise. Because beneath the glittering facade of the Riviera, Something was about to break, and when it did, it wouldn't be her. In the next chapter, she will discover how easily admiration turns to control, and how a single moment of defiance can light the fuse that changes everything. So keep watching, this story is only beginning. Morning sunlight spilled across the penthouse like gold poured from a careless hand. It gleamed on marble floors, reflected off glass, and yet none of it touched Amara's warmth. She sat at the breakfast table, laptop open, eyes fixed on an unfinished sentence that had been waiting for her for nearly a year. Her paper, Echoes of the Unseen, African Geometry and Mediterranean Architecture. A title that once made her pulse quicken. Now it mocked her from the screen. Behind her, Nate's voice floated through the apartment like background music. "The press kit needs your bio," he said, scrolling on his phone. "Something short. Keep it light. Nothing too academic." Amara's fingers paused above the keyboard. "You mean nothing too real?" He didn't look up. "You know how people are. Too much detail and they tune out. We're selling vision tonight, not a lecture." Selling. That word cut sharper than any insult. Nate looked up finally, flashing that disarming smile that once felt like sunlight. "You know I'm only saying this to help you." Help. Another word that meant control when spoken in his tone. Amara closed her laptop gently. "Maybe I don't need help writing about my own life." His smile froze. A pause stretched between them like a hairline crack on crystal. Then, smoothly, he changed the subject. He always did. "Lucia's coming by later. She's doing a feature on emerging philanthropists. It'll be great exposure for us." U.S. But when the article came out last month, Amara's name hadn't appeared once. Only the American entrepreneur and his partner. That afternoon, she met Lucia Romano again, the journalist who noticed too much. Lucia entered the penthouse with a camera bag and a look that said she'd seen 1,000 beautiful prisons disguised as homes. "Still working on your research?" she asked casually while adjusting her lens. Amara hesitated, then answered honestly. "Trying to." Lucia's eyebrow lifted. "Trying or allowed to?" The question hit like a bell. Amara laughed lightly, pretending it was absurd, but inside something splintered. Lucia noticed. "Don't let them turn your silence into decor," she said softly. Later, when Lucia left, Nate praised her professionalism, then added, "You might want to tone down the academic stuff next time she's around. It can come off intimidating." He said intimidating the way people say inconvenient. Amara walked to the terrace, where the Mediterranean stretched impossibly blue and endless. She'd once stood before the pyramids of Giza and felt the same vastness. Except then, it filled her with awe, not loneliness. Now even the sea seemed curated, contained behind invisible glass. That night, Nate hosted a dinner for investors. The table was a tableau of perfection. Crystal glasses, candlelight, laughter choreographed like a commercial. Amara smiled, listened, performed. "This is my fiancée, Dr. Amara Collins," Nate announced. "She's an art historian. Columbia. She brings perspective. Perspective. Not knowledge, not passion, just a garnish for his narrative." A man across the table asked, "So, Dr. Collins, what do you think about cultural preservation in modern architecture?" Amara straightened, ready to answer, but Nate's hand brushed her arm lightly, a signal. "Oh, you'd love her lectures," he interjected, "but she's modest about her brilliance." He turned the conversation before she could speak. The laughter moved on without her. Amara sipped her wine, tasting the bitterness of invisibility. When the guests finally left, she walked into Nate's office, past the framed photographs of awards and magazine covers. On his desk sat her paper, printed, annotated, red circles, crossed-out phrases, rewritten sentences. "You edited my work?" she asked, her voice low. He looked up, casual, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Just refining, making it more accessible. You use too much theory. People like simplicity." "It's our future," he corrected. "We're a team, Amara. Don't make this a thing." Her pulse thudded in her throat. "You're afraid my words will outshine yours." He laughed softly. "Don't be dramatic." Dramatic. The final insult that every woman hears when she begins to speak her truth. Amara took the pages and walked out before he could say another word. She didn't know where she was going, only that the walls around her felt made of paper, thin, fragile, pretending to hold. She ended up in the study overlooking the marina. Books lined the walls, their spines familiar, comforting. Baldwin, Morrison, Hooks, Achebe, voices that refused to shrink. She ran her fingers over their names like prayer beads. In the glass reflection, she saw herself. Beautiful, yes, but blurred by exhaustion. A woman edited out of her own story. Her phone buzzed. A message from Professor Elias Cheng, her former mentor. Still waiting for your submission to the Heritage Symposium. Deadline next month. Don't vanish, Amara. Don't vanish. She typed a reply, deleted it, typed again. Working on it. A lie she could no longer bear. As she closed her laptop, she noticed the faint hum of Nate's voice in another room, speaking on the phone. She's brilliant, but she needs direction. She can't quite manage on her own. Each word was a pin in her skin. Amara turned off the lights and stood in darkness, the city shimmering below like an ocean of false stars. Somewhere beneath the glitter, she knew the foundation was cracking. For now, she remained inside the illusion, polished, poised, contained. But every wall in that glass palace was thinner than it looked. And when it finally broke, everyone would hear the sound. She whispered into the silence, not to Nate, not even to herself, but to the memory of the woman she used to be. I'm still here. The sea outside answered with a soft, relentless roar, as if the world was already preparing for the moment she'd rise. Morning broke in vermilion strokes across the Riviera, and the principality woke like a stagehand pulling ropes. Awnings unfurled, shutters clacked, yachts turned their gleaming faces to the sun. Amara left Monaco for Menton with a tote bag and the pretense of errands. She needed a place where voices rose and fell without permission, where bargaining sounded like laughter, and no one corrected the light to make it flattering. The market met her with pepper and lemon, sea-bright anchovies and the holiness of warm bread. Sellers sang prices as if blessing them. She breathed it in, the ordinary miracle of uncurated life. A woman in a saffron scarf pressed sprigs of verbena into Amara's palm. Pour dormir, she winked. For sleeping. Amara smiled and tucked the leaves into her bag with the reverence of a pilgrim receiving relics. Sleep hadn't visited in weeks, not since the paper had begun tapping at her skull at 3 a.m., asking to be let out. She wrote at night until her hands trembled, and by morning she deleted it all. Some loyalty to disappearance she couldn't explain, like a tide that erased its own signature. Her phone vibrated, a calendar notification she didn't remember creating. Strategy breakfast at the yacht club, confirmed. Another, wardrobe consult, rescheduled. And another, stacked like tiles. Dinner with Whitaker Capital clients, location changed. The itinerary was a reef, and she was learning its edges the hard way. She knew Nate managed schedules to help, but lately it felt like he was arranging her breath too. What rooms it entered, which silences it honored. By noon, she was back in Monte Carlo, funneled through the hush of a private members club where everything had been softened into discretion. Thick carpets, cooled voices, mirrors that returned a gentler version of whoever stood before them. Nate slid a glass of sparkling water across the table with the ease of a maitre d' of lives. Lucia's piece is netting interest, he said, pleased. If we stay focused, the foundation's launch will be clean. Clean, Amara asked. Like a rewrite? Like a narrative, he corrected, smiling. The public hates mess. We have to protect you from that. From what? Complexity or herself? She traced a finger along the condensation ring on her glass, the circle tightening into a small moon. A soft chime announced Lucia Romano at the door, camera strap at her wrist, a storm tucked neatly behind her eyes. Quick quote? Lucia asked as she took a seat. Favorite architectural detail on the Riviera? Amara opened her mouth, ready to praise the Moorish lines hidden in Belle Epoque excess, when Nate cut in, tone light. She'll say the curve of the coastline. She loves poetry more than plaster. Lucia's gaze flickered to Amara's and held. Do you? She asked softly. I love truth most, Amara answered, surprised at her own voice. And truth leaves fingerprints. Lucia smiled as if she'd been waiting for that. Then let's follow them. After Lucia left, Nate leaned back, the smile gone. We talked about keeping things simple. We talked about keeping things palatable, Amara replied. Those are not the same word. His jaw flexed, the smallest storm on an otherwise perfect sea. You're tired. I'm asking for cohesion, not capitulation. He meant control. He always had. She stood to go, and he rose too quickly, knocking a lemon slice to the carpet. He didn't bend to pick it up. The staff would. The mask never stooped. She spent the afternoon in the study, the verbena on her desk, perfuming the air like a memory of other choices. The document glowed open. Echoes of the unseen. She typed until sentences made a scaffolding for her pulse, until her own voice stopped sounding like an intruder. She wrote about mosaics that smuggled entire histories into ornamental borders, about courtyards that borrowed shade from North Africa and called it Riviera style. She wrote that absence is not proof, only the success of erasure. A chime. Email from Professor Elias Cheng, submitting you for a panel at the Riviera Heritage Symposium. Topic: Diasporic imprint on Mediterranean forms. Need your abstract in 72 hours. And Amara, stop vanishing. Architects hate ghost loads. She laughed once, sharp, grateful, then felt the laughter curdle when another email landed. From admin via Whitaker Capital. Subject: Panel coordination. Declined on behalf of Dr. Collins. Schedule conflict. Her hands went cold. He'd answered her no before she could say her yes. She marched to Nate's office. He was mid-call, eyes flicking to her, a finger lifted for patience. She waited exactly none. He muted, sighing. Can this wait? No, she said, placing her phone on his desk, the decline notice stark as a verdict. Why did you answer for me? Because I knew you'd feel pressured to say yes. He pivoted into softness, into husbandry. You're stretched thin. Let me shoulder some of it. You're not shouldering, she said quietly. You're shepherding. Different animal. He exhaled through his nose, amused by nothing. We're trying to build a life without turbulence, Amara. Optics matter. Your work is important, of course, but timing is everything. And my timing is never. She stared at him until he looked away. You don't want me inconvenient. You want me immaculate. I want us safe, he snapped, and then, quicker, smooth, together. She almost told him about the nights the paper pulled her back from sleep, about the verbena and the bakery woman who gave it without asking for a bio, about the market where language was barter and nobody required permission to be vivid. Instead, she picked up her phone and left, because she understood something crucial. Some conversations are surgeries, and not all rooms are sterile. At dusk, she met Lucia on the promenade. The air was apricot and salt. He answered for you, Lucia said, not asking. Amara nodded. He calls it care. Lucia watched the water, a long, considering silence. This coast looks gentle, she said, but step past the postcards and you'll find reef after reef. Sharp, invisible. They don't sink you. They slice you so slowly you call it weather. If I must vanish to fit the frame, Amara said, tasting the words before she let them go, I'm not in the picture, I'm the price. Lucia turned, eyes bright, then stopped paying. That night, Amara wrote again. No deletion, no mercy. She wrote that the Riviera's beauty was a palimpsest, and if you scraped carefully, you could still feel the pulse of earlier hands. She wrote that palaces wore borrowed geometry like mascara, and nobody asked who loaned it. She wrote herself into the record. Close to midnight, her phone lit with a new invitation. This one, public, irrefutable. International Heritage Gala, Casino de Monte Carlo. Theme, the memory of stone. Attached was a note from the chair. We're curating a conversation on influence and appropriation. Your presence would be invaluable. The entire city would be there, wearing its best alibis. From the doorway, Nate's voice arrived like a tide returning. I saw the gala invite, he said carefully. Big press, big donors. He crossed the room, hands in pockets, the choreography of reason. You can attend, of course, but maybe keep it peripheral. Let the foundation speak tonight. Amara looked past him to the window where the harbor glittered, not asking for permission to exist. The reef was mapped, the mask too. She closed her laptop as if sealing a vow. "I won't be peripheral," she said. "Not anymore." The villa at St. Jean Cap Ferrat looked like a postcard pressed between glass. Ivory walls, cypress shadows, a view so perfect it almost erased the people who didn't belong in it. The afternoon heat shimmered above the marble terrace where white linen tables had been arranged like chess pieces. Waiters in gloves poured champagne into crystal flutes that whispered of wealth and silence. And in the middle of it all stood Amara Collins, statuesque, brilliant, and slightly misplaced, as if someone had dragged reality into a dream too polished to hold her shape. She wore the soft ivory dress Nate had chosen. "You'll blend," he'd said that morning, pressing a kiss to her temple. White photographs beautifully here. She hadn't argued. She was tired of being told that her brilliance needed editing. Now, under the Mediterranean sun, she watched the crowd. Men with sun-browned hands and old money charm. Women draped in fabrics that cost more than her fellowship once paid in a year. Laughter floated like perfume. The sea glittered indifferently beyond the garden wall. Nate was radiant. He always was when he performed. Surrounded by investors, he moved like a man who believed the world owed him applause. Every few minutes, he would gesture toward her. "My fiancé, Dr. Collins, art historian, Columbia." The word doctor always came out like a novelty he owned. A tall woman in red approached her with a kind smile. "You must be Amara. Nate talks about you endlessly." "I'm sure he does," Amara replied, returning the smile. "You're glowing," the woman said, lowering her voice, "though I hope you've brought sunscreen. The Riviera light is unforgiving." Amara caught the pause. Unforgiving for whom? The woman's glance lingered just long enough for the meaning to settle. From across the terrace, Nate caught her eye and gave the slightest nod, his way of saying, "Let it go." So she did what she'd been trained to do. She laughed softly and changed the subject. Later, as guests gathered under the awnings, she found herself beside a group discussing restoration projects in Marrakesh. "Fascinating work," one man said, swirling his drink, "though the locals are often unreliable." Amara's voice, cool as glass, slipped between them. "Unreliable or underpaid?" The laughter faltered. Nate's hand appeared on her shoulder, gentle, proprietary. "She's passionate about fairness," he explained. "Part of her charm." The word charm felt like a chain. A waiter passed with a tray of canapés. Amara took one she didn't want, just to have something to do with her hands. Every detail of this party seemed designed to disguise power. Linen, lace, laughter. Red flags stitched from white fabric. As the sun slid lower, Nate pulled her aside beneath an olive tree. "You're magnificent, but you're tense," he murmured. "You make people uneasy when you challenge them." "I make people think," she said. "Same thing," he replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. She stared at him for a long moment. "Do you hear yourself?" He sighed, adjusting his cufflinks. "Amara, you're extraordinary, but sometimes extraordinary needs context. These people, this world, it's delicate. They won't understand your tone." "My tone," she repeated almost to herself. "You mean my existence?" Nate's silence was an answer. The music from the terrace swelled, a violin tracing something elegant and mournful through the air. Across the lawn, Lucia Romano's camera flashed once. Amara hadn't realized the journalist was attending. Their eyes met, and Lucia raised her glass in a subtle salute before turning back to her companions. For a heartbeat, Amara felt seen. After dinner, the host gathered everyone for photos. The women in pastels stood near the front, the men arranged like anchors behind them. Nate guided her to the center, hand light on her back. When the photographer raised his camera, Nate whispered, "Tilt your chin down a bit." The lights harsh on darker. She stepped forward, breaking his whisper mid-word, her movement smooth but decisive. The shutter clicked. In the final frame, she stood slightly apart, the only one not smiling, the only one unedited by fear. That night in the car, the silence was electric. The scent of salt and jasmine drifted through the open window. Nate's jaw worked as he drove. "You embarrassed me," he said at last. "That photo will circulate. People will see tension. They'll see truth," Amara answered. They'll see defiance. Good. He turned to her at a red light, the city's glow fracturing across his face. Why do you insist on turning everything into a statement? Because silence has never saved me, she said simply. The light changed. He looked away first. Back at the penthouse, he disappeared into his office. Amara went to the balcony. The sea below was black glass, holding its secrets. Somewhere beyond the horizon, storms were forming. She could feel them in her chest. Her phone buzzed. A message from Professor Elias Cheng. Panel confirmed. Sira Ndia on board. Your work fits perfectly. Send final abstract by Monday. For a long time she stared at the screen. Then she typed, I'll be there. Inside she could hear Nate pacing, his voice sharp on a call. Something about image management, narrative control. Words like nets tightening around her. But the sea was louder. She looked down at her dress, still immaculate, glowing faintly in the moonlight. White linen, spotless, beautiful, and utterly transparent once the light passed through. In the reflection on the glass door, she saw herself doubled. The polished version and the real one behind it. For the first time she didn't flinch. The wind lifted the curtains, carrying the scent of salt and rebellion into the room. She whispered into the dark. They can polish the world, but they can't erase the tide. Somewhere far below, the waves answered with a crash. Soft, deliberate, unstoppable. Morning arrived, brittle and white, as if the night had been scraped clean. The Riviera shimmered, pretending nothing had happened. In the penthouse above Port Hercules, Amara sat by the window, watching sunlight slide across the water. Nate's schedule pulsed on her phone. Breakfast with the foundation board, site visit at noon, cocktail briefing at 7. Every hour accounted for, every silence filled. Her life, pre-edited. Her own calendar was empty, except for one blinking reminder. Heritage Symposium submission. Today. The deadline she'd promised herself she wouldn't miss. She opened her laptop, but the words refused to come. Her mind played back fragments of last night. Nate's voice sharp with reprimand, the hum of tires on the highway, the taste of salt she hadn't been sure was from the sea or her own mouth. Her phone rang. Aunt Geneva. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something in her chest answered first. Baby girl, her aunt said, her Brooklyn lilt warm and unfiltered. I was starting to think Monaco swallowed you whole. Amara exhaled, smiling despite herself. Maybe it did. Then spit yourself back out, Geneva said. You sound tired. I'm fine. Amara lied automatically. Fine is the word women use when they're bleeding and can't find the wound, her aunt replied. The truth cracked something open. It's Nate, Amara whispered. He doesn't shout. He edits. He rearranges my life like I'm a layout in his magazine. I stopped recognizing the woman in my own mirror. Silence hummed on the other end, thick with distance and fury restrained by love. Then Geneva spoke slowly, each word landing like a heartbeat. Listen to me, Amara Collins. You come from women who survived too much to raise a granddaughter who apologizes for her light. Your grandmother marched through the streets of New Orleans when they said colored women had no right to read. Your mother taught history in classrooms that forgot our names. And you, her voice softened, you carry all of them every time you open your mouth to tell the world who built it. Amara closed her eyes. I thought love meant compromise. Love ain't supposed to cost you yourself, Geneva said. That's not love. That's colonization. The words hit like gospel. Amara pressed a hand to her heart, as if to steady the beating. Outside, yachts glided across the harbor, monuments to the illusion that money could buy peace. I've been so afraid, she admitted. He tells me I'm too ambitious, too direct, too visible. And part of me believed him, believed that maybe I should be quieter to stay loved. Baby, Geneva said gently, quiet women never changed the world. They just made it easier for men like Nate to run it. The line went still for a moment. Amara heard the sound of her aunt's breath, the faint whistle of a kettle in the background. That domestic sound, ordinary, grounding, felt like salvation. Do you have any money of your own? Geneva asked abruptly. Amara hesitated. Some, not much. He manages most of it. Then listen carefully. Start untangling the net. Quietly. You don't have to burn the house tonight, but start unlocking the doors. Amara swallowed. And then what? Then you remember who you are. You finish that paper. You show the world what he tried to dim. When they hung up, the silence in the penthouse was no longer oppressive. It was expectant, like the air before a storm. Amara returned to her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Then she began to type, not with fear, but with fury that had finally found its shape. She wrote about hidden patterns carved into Mediterranean churches by enslaved craftsmen whose names had been erased, about symmetry born from African geometry, about beauty stolen and renamed European. Her sentences burned with precision. The paper stopped being research and became resurrection. Hours passed unnoticed. The sun climbed, then softened, spilling amber light over the desk. When she finished, she attached the document to an email addressed to Professor Elias Cheng. Subject: Abstract Submission, the memory beneath the marble. She hesitated over the send button, hearing Nate's voice in her head. Optics, timing, appropriateness. Then she clicked send. The sound was small, but it felt seismic. Moments later, the front door opened. Nate's footsteps echoed across the marble. Amara? His voice was smooth, casual, the calm before manipulation. We're expected at the foundation dinner. You should start getting ready. I'm not going, she said without turning. The pause behind her was sharp. Not going? I have work. Real work. He laughed softly, a knife disguised as music. You mean your hobby? Amara, you have to understand. Your visibility affects both of us. She stood and faced him. You mean your visibility, your spotless narrative. I'm done polishing it. His smile froze. You're being emotional. I'm being alive. For a heartbeat, the air between them thickened with something dangerous. Control losing its balance. Nate's face hardened. I've done everything for you. No, she said quietly. You did everything to me. He opened his mouth to reply, but she was already walking toward the door. Where are you going? He demanded. To buy a SIM card, she said, and a notebook that's mine. She didn't slam the door. She didn't need to. The click was enough. Outside, the Riviera twilight spread like bruised silk. People strolled, laughing, clinking glasses. The world looked the same, but for Amara, something irreversible had shifted. She called her aunt again. I sent it, she said simply. Good, Geneva answered. You just cut the net. Now swim. Amara looked out at the darkening sea, its surface calm but endless. Somewhere in that vastness was freedom. Not perfect, not safe, but hers. And as the first stars blinked awake over the harbor, she whispered the words she'd been afraid to believe. I'm not lost. I'm surfacing. The atelier was hidden behind a courtyard of bougainvillea in Nice, its entrance marked only by a small brass plaque that read, Kemi Balogun, Haute Création. Inside, light spilled through tall windows, cutting across bolts of fabric like revelation. Patterns of color swayed from the ceiling, deep indigos, molten golds, burnt orange threaded with silver. It smelled faintly of dye and determination. Amara stood in the doorway, still uncertain why she'd come. She'd told herself it was curiosity, not defiance. But standing amid the riot of texture, she knew better. She was here because her paper had been sent, her silence had broken, and her next move had to be seen. Dr. Collins. The voice was rich, musical. Kemi emerged from behind a dress form, pins in her mouth, tape around her neck. I've been waiting for you. Amara blinked. You have? Kemi smiled. Lucia sent me your photo months ago. Said, this woman has a story she's about to wear. Amara felt heat rise to her cheeks. I'm not sure I'm ready to exist? Kemi interrupted softly. You already do. The question is how loudly. She led Amara deeper into the studio, past sketches pinned like butterflies on the wall. Tell me about the event, she said, unspooling a measuring tape. The International Heritage Gala, Amara replied. Theme, the memory of stone. Kemi's eyes gleamed. Then your dress will speak marble and fire. She began to measure Amara's shoulders, murmuring numbers to herself. And tell me about the man who doesn't deserve to stand next to you. Amara laughed, short, surprised. That obvious? It's always obvious, Kemi said. Women walk in here carrying ghosts. I just design exits for them. The words settled into Amara like truth she'd always known. I don't want something pretty, she said. I want something honest. Honest is my favorite fabric. Kemi pulled open a drawer and unfolded a length of cloth that seemed to hold the sunset itself. Gold that deepened into bronze, alive when it moved. Hand-woven in Lagos, she explained, dyed with cola bark and indigo. Strong enough to outlive flattery. Amara reached out, fingertips brushing the fabric. It felt warm, almost breathing. What do you see when you look at it? Kemi asked. My mother's voice, Amara said after a moment. My grandmother's hands. The part of me I keep apologizing for. Kemi nodded. Then that's what we'll sew, an apology undone. As Kemi draped the cloth across her, the mirror caught the reflection of a woman both fierce and unfamiliar. The color against her skin wasn't contrast, it was harmony. For years she'd been told her tone needed softening, her light needed dimming. But this fabric refused to obey those rules. It demanded to be seen. Kemi adjusted a seam, stepping back. You see, she said, a dress is never just a dress. It's an argument. And this one will say, you cannot edit what was divine to begin with. Amara's throat tightened. Then it's not a gown, she whispered. It's a thesis. Exactly, Kemi smiled. You've written it. I'm just binding it. Over the next days, Amara returned again and again to the atelier. The creation grew like a living thing, each fitting a conversation, each stitch a declaration. As the gown took shape, so did she. The fabric curved over her hips unapologetically, caught light like conviction, moved like liquid courage. Sometimes Kemi would hum as she worked. When they look at you, she said once, they'll see the architecture of rebellion. Lines that don't ask permission to stand tall. Amara smiled. You sound like my research. Then your research has excellent taste. By the final fitting, word of the design had spread quietly through circles that liked to know beauty before it entered the room. But Amara didn't care for gossip or validation. What mattered was how she felt when she wore it. Rooted, sovereign, restored. Kemi fastened the last clasp and stepped back. Look, she said simply. Amara turned toward the mirror. The woman reflected there wasn't the fiancé who'd been coached to dim. She was the scholar who had studied cathedrals and traced the fingerprints of forgotten builders. Her gown mirrored that lineage, architecture and ancestry woven together. Gold bled into bronze, the hem kissed with indigo. A crown of braids framed her face, deliberate and ancestral. You were never made to blend, Kemi said softly. You were made to illuminate. Outside, the late afternoon light filtered through the bougainvillea, scattering petals across the floor like blessings. Amara touched the fabric, feeling its weight. He'll hate it. Kemi's eyes flashed. Then it's perfect. They both laughed, and in that laughter was something holy, freedom wrapped in silk and defiance. When Amara left the atelier, the gown hung in its garment bag over her arm like a secret still too powerful to reveal. The evening air smelled of sea salt and possibility. On her walk back to the station, strangers turned to look, sensing that whatever she carried wasn't just fashion, it was destiny. As the train carried her toward Monaco, she scrolled through her phone. One message waited from Professor Cheng. Your paper's been accepted. The panel wants you in Florence next month. Congratulations, Dr. Collins. She stared at the words, stunned. The world she thought she'd forfeited was calling her back. On her own terms this time. When the train curved along the coastline, she saw her reflection in the glass, faint and doubled against the sea. For the first time, she didn't flinch. The woman staring back was both scholar and storm, maker and muse. In the distance, Monaco's lights glimmered like a jeweled trap waiting to close. But she smiled, because she knew something it didn't. You can't trap a tide that's already rising. She pressed her hand over the gown. It wasn't just a dress anymore. It was a declaration. A thesis written in fabric and flame, one the whole city would soon be forced to read. The morning of the gala arrived wrapped in mist, a hush over the harbor that felt almost merciful. Monaco looked softer under the fog, its sharp edges blurred, as though even the city understood it was about to witness something it could never unsee. Amara stood by the window, coffee cooling in her hands, the garment bag draped over a chair like a secret ready to detonate. Downstairs, she could hear Nate's voice through the open doors of his office. Low, controlled, the rhythm of someone who had already rehearsed both his victories and his excuses. He was talking about brand alignment, visual coherence, and the importance of tone. It wasn't business, it was theater. And Amara, she realized, had been cast too long as the silent set piece that made the lead look luminous. She set her cup down and walked toward the sound. He didn't notice her at first, too busy pacing. "I don't want surprises tonight," he was saying into the phone. "She'll attend, yes, but in something understated. She understands optics." The words struck her like a slap she didn't flinch from. When he finally hung up, she was standing in the doorway. "Do I?" she asked quietly. Nate turned, caught between guilt and irritation. "You startled me. You were talking about me." "I was talking about us," he corrected, as though language itself was something he owned. "You know how these events are. Press, donors, investors. One wrong impression and it can set the foundation back months." "Your foundation," she said. "Our life," he replied smoothly. "Our reputation. Amara, this isn't just about you. It's about balance, presentation." She studied him, the immaculate suit, the measured tone, the gaze that calculated everything it claimed to love. "You mean control," she said. He sighed, a performance of patience. "Why do you insist on turning partnership into opposition?" "Because you built the partnership on silence," she said. He moved closer, lowering his voice like a man confiding in reason. "I'm asking for compromise. That's what love is." "No," she said, her pulse steady. "That's what fear is." Nate froze. For a moment, the room was a contest of breathing. Then he smiled, the kind of smile meant to erase arguments, not resolve them. "Wear the white silk," he said softly. "You'll look radiant, elegant, appropriate." Amara tilted her head. "Appropriate for whom?" "For everyone watching," he said. And there it was, the truth, naked and trembling between them. He didn't love her. He loved what her presence could perform. She turned away. "I already have a dress." His voice sharpened. "May I see it?" "You will," she said, walking toward the door. With everyone else. That afternoon, while he left for his pre-gala meetings, Amara prepared in silence. She laid the gown across the bed, the gold and bronze threads catching the late light until the entire room seemed to pulse. Each seam was a statement, every fold a refusal. She'd chosen no jewels, only the thin gold chain her grandmother had given her and the braid crown her mother once taught her to weave. When she was done, the mirror did not show defiance. It showed restoration. As she fastened the final clasp, her phone buzzed, a message from Kemi. "Remember, it's not fabric. It's evidence." Amara smiled faintly. Evidence of what? That she existed without permission, that she could be the whole architecture, not just the ornament. The penthouse door opened. Nate's voice carried down the hall. "You ready? We need to leave in 20. When he entered the bedroom, the words dissolved on his tongue. For a heartbeat, even he couldn't find language. The gown moved when she turned, a slow, liquid gleam of bronze and gold that made the air itself seem to bend around her. Her skin glowed against it, not hidden, not minimized, but celebrated. His eyes darted over her like searchlights scanning for fault lines. "That's bold. Honest," she corrected. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Amara, please. You're making this difficult." "Am I?" "I'm trying to protect you," he said. She met his gaze steadily. "You mean protect yourself. You're afraid of being seen standing next to me when I stop performing gratitude." He laughed softly, but it wavered. "You're reading too much into everything." That's what historians do. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Finally, he said, "You'll regret this." "Maybe," she said, reaching for her clutch. "But at least I'll know it's my regret, not yours." They rode to the gala in a car thick with unspoken things. Nate scrolled his phone. Amara watched the coastline blur past like a memory fading. The city glowed brighter as night fell, gold on water, glass on stone. But beneath the glitter, she could feel the hum of something electric, inevitable. When they arrived at the Casino de Monte Carlo, flashes exploded like summer lightning. Nate stepped out first, smiling, every angle measured. Then Amara emerged, and for a breathless second, the crowd shifted, the cameras turned, the noise dimmed, and the story changed. She didn't pose. She simply existed. And somehow that was enough to rearrange the air. Inside, the chandeliers scattered light like constellations. Musicians played something elegant and tragic. Nate guided her through the room, whispering greetings. "Stay close," he murmured. "Less is more." But Amara had already stopped listening. The gown caught every reflection, every glance. She saw women watching her with something between admiration and recognition. Men looked, then looked again, as if recalibrating what beauty could mean. At the bar, Lucia Romano appeared with her camera, smiling like someone who'd been waiting for this moment. "You look like the thesis he tried to erase," she whispered. Amara's laugh was soft, alive. "No," she said, "I look like the footnote that became the headline." Across the room, Nate stood surrounded by donors, performing ease. But Amara could see the flicker in his smile, the panic of a man realizing he'd lost command of the narrative. For once, she didn't shrink to save him. She breathed, slow and full, as if reclaiming oxygen after years of learning to live on optics. When the orchestra paused between songs, the room seemed to hush around her. The air was velvet and voltage. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Every light in the hall had already turned to find her. The grand hall of the Casino de Monte Carlo glittered like an invented heaven. Chandeliers spilled gold over marble floors polished to such brilliance that every step reflected back twice, once for the world and once for the soul. The International Heritage Gala had always been Monaco's most exquisite illusion, where the wealthy gathered to congratulate themselves for remembering the past while rewriting it to fit their image. Tonight, however, history walked in wearing bronze and fire. When Amara stepped through the archway, conversation fractured. The music continued, violins trembling like held breath. But something in the room shifted. Heads turned, then bodies, like compasses seeking true north. Every jewel in the hall seemed to bow its light toward her. Her gown was a poem made visible. The burnished gold of sunsets over Lagos woven into the deep bronze of her skin. The indigo hem whispering of ocean crossings survived, and stories reclaimed. But it wasn't just the dress. It was the way she wore it. Chin high, gaze level, unafraid of the gaze that sought to diminish her. Nate felt the crowd's focus like a heat he hadn't anticipated. His smile froze into performance. This was supposed to be his night. Donors, dignitaries, cameras orbiting around his charm. Yet the lenses had found a new star. He reached for her elbow, the touch rehearsed, proprietary. "You're making a scene," he hissed under the applause disguised as polite chatter. "I'm existing," she said evenly. "If that's a scene, perhaps the room needs better lighting." Her words landed like a quiet explosion. Nate's hand fell away. A waiter passed, his tray trembling slightly as he looked at her, whispering, "Magnifique." She smiled, not out of vanity, but out of recognition. The kind that passes between strangers who've both known erasure. At the top of the grand staircase, the Contessa herself appeared. Elena de Barbaro, the legendary art patron whose name adorned half the cultural institutions in southern Europe. Draped in crimson velvet, she surveyed the crowd with the grace of someone accustomed to command. Her eyes found Amara and held. The Contessa descended, each step deliberate. "Dr. Collins," she said, her Italian accent lilting like music through the room. "Your presence honors us." Nate blinked, unprepared. "You two have met?" Amara inclined her head. "Not yet, but perhaps we were meant to." Elena smiled, slow, assessing. "I saw you from across the hall," she said, and thought, finally, a woman dressed not to disappear but to declare. "Then I've chosen well," Amara replied. The Contessa gestured toward a circle of guests near the stage. "Join us. We're discussing preservation, though I suspect you'll bring a perspective that's been missing." As Amara moved through the crowd beside the Contessa, murmurs followed like ripples in water. Nate trailed behind, a shadow scrambling to keep up with the light. At the center of the circle stood Dr. Sira Ndiaye, Senegalese-born, Paris-based curator of the Musée des Civilisations de l'Europe et de la Méditerranée, a woman whose work Amara had studied obsessively. Sira's voice was warm honey with steel underneath. Heritage is memory with intent, she was saying, and intent can either illuminate or erase. Amara spoke before she realized she joined in. And sometimes it does both, polishing one truth until the others disappear. The circle turned toward her. Recognition flashed in Sierra's eyes. "Well said," she replied. "And you are?" "Amara Collins, Colombia. My work focuses on African geometries in Mediterranean design." Sierra's smile deepened. "Ah, the one who sent the paper on The Memory Beneath the Marble. Professor Cheng forwarded it to me. Brilliant." Nate's composure cracked just slightly. A micro-expression, a flicker of disbelief that she'd outmaneuvered his gatekeeping without raising her voice. Amara's pulse quickened. "You read it?" "Twice," Sierra said. "You remind me why I started writing. To name what the world pretends not to see." The Contessa lifted her glass. "Then perhaps you'll name it again, Dr. Collins. I'd like you to speak at tomorrow's symposium session. The audience should hear the woman behind the words." The room stirred. Cameras angled subtly. Somewhere Nate's jaw tightened. "That's incredibly generous," he interjected, his tone brittle beneath the charm. "But Dr. Collins isn't scheduled to." "I am now," Amara said. The Contessa's smile widened, a queen amused by courage. "Excellent." Then it settled. Lucia Romano, standing near the press table, caught Amara's eye. She raised her phone discreetly and clicked a photo. Amara mid-laugh, light cascading across her face, the Contessa's crimson sleeve beside her. Within minutes, the image would find its way online, captioned, "The Scholar Who Stole the Gala." As the night unfolded, Amara spoke with scholars and curators, her voice returning like a language remembered. They listened, not with the polite tolerance she'd grown used to, but with engagement, with recognition. Every exchange stitched another piece of her back together. Across the ballroom, Nate watched helplessly as his narrative unraveled. The woman he'd tried to package as a polished accessory was commanding the very stage he'd built to contain her. He crossed the room, his expression neutral, his voice a whisper when he reached her side. "Enjoying the spotlight?" Amara turned to him, her smile radiant and calm. "No," she said, "I'm enjoying the air." "The air?" "Oxygen," she said, meeting his gaze. "The thing you forget exists when you live inside a picture frame." He stared at her, speechless for once. When midnight approached, the orchestra struck its final note. The crowd began to drift toward the terraces overlooking the sea. The Contessa took Amara's hand. "You've reminded this city that history is not a museum," she said. "It's a mirror. Most people don't like what they see in it. You should be careful." Amara nodded slowly. "Careful isn't in my thesis," she said. The Contessa laughed softly. "Good. Neither is permission." Outside, the Riviera glittered beneath the moon, the same water that had carried centuries of stolen treasures, now reflecting a new kind of light. Amara stood by the balustrade, wind lifting the hem of her gown, the scent of salt and rebellion in the air. Behind her, Nate lingered in the doorway, watching a woman he no longer recognized or owned. The optics had shifted. The narrative was slipping. And for the first time in her life, Amara felt the sweet, dizzying rush of oxygen that had always been hers to breathe. The night had a pulse. The ballroom behind them thrummed with laughter, music, and the fragile hum of wealth congratulating itself. Inside, chandeliers burned like suns, but out on the balcony, the air was cooler, darker, alive. The Mediterranean spread out below, silver and endless, whispering to the cliffs that some things could not be contained. Amara stood at the balustrade, her fingers tracing the cold marble edge. The sea wind tugged at the hem of her gown, setting it into motion like a flame that refused to die. Behind her, the doors opened with a soft click. Nate stepped out, closing them firmly. The muffled music inside became a heartbeat they no longer shared. "So," he said, his voice low and rehearsed, "you've had your moment." She didn't turn. "My moment?" He came closer, the scent of cologne and control following him. "You know what I mean. The Contessa's invitation, the camera flashes, the little rebellion everyone's pretending not to gossip about." He gave a brittle laugh. "You enjoy shocking people, don't you?" Amara finally faced him. "I enjoy breathing." He smiled tightly, stepping closer. You could have told me about the paper, about the panel. We're supposed to move in sync, Amara. We're a team. A team doesn't erase its players, she said. You decided what was safe for me to do, where I should be, how much of myself was acceptable to show. I protected you. No, she said quietly. You curated me. The word landed like a slap. Nate's jaw flexed, his eyes dark. You think this world was waiting to embrace you? You think they'd applaud if not for me opening doors? I didn't need you to open them, Amara replied, just to stop standing in the doorway. He laughed under his breath, the sound sharp and incredulous. You really believe you can stand in rooms like this without someone like me to steady you? Amara took a step forward, her voice calm but cutting. I stood in lecture halls before you ever shook my hand. I've been steady on every ground you mistook for yours. For a moment, he said nothing. His gaze flicked toward the ballroom, where laughter rose again, fragile, oblivious. You're being unkind, he said finally, the words carefully chosen, brittle with injury. Truth often is, she said. Don't do this here, he hissed, glancing toward the windows. People will notice. Let them, she said. You've spent 3 years building a version of me that wouldn't embarrass you. Tonight, that version died. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of salt and champagne. Somewhere, the orchestra inside began a waltz. The melody drifted through the glass, incongruously gentle. Nate exhaled slowly, struggling to recalibrate his tone. You're angry, he said, and I get it. Success does strange things to people. Success doesn't change people, she interrupted. It reveals them. And what it's revealing is that you never loved me. You loved the reflection you thought I'd provide. His expression hardened. That's not fair. It's accurate. He stepped closer again, lowering his voice to a plea. Amara, I love you. I've built everything around us. I've made sacrifices for you. You've made sacrifices of me, she said, and called it love. The silence after that was vast. A gull cried somewhere over the water. Inside, applause swelled. Someone must have given a speech. The world continued its pageantry, unaware that theirs had ended. Nate finally spoke, the warmth gone from his tone. Do you know what people will say tomorrow? That you embarrassed me, that you made a spectacle of yourself. Amara turned back to the sea. Spectacle, she murmured. It's a beautiful word when you think about it. It means something worth seeing. You're twisting everything. No, she said softly. I'm straightening it. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. You think this gown, this little performance, makes you untouchable? These people don't care about you, Amara. They're watching because they're amused. They'll move on. Then let them move on, she said. I'm not here for their applause. I'm here because I finally remembered how to show up for myself. She stepped past him toward the doors. He reached out, catching her wrist, not harshly, but with the desperation of someone watching a narrative dissolve. Don't walk away, he said. Not like this. Amara looked down at his hand, then up into his face. Then tell me, she said quietly, if you stripped away the optics, the cameras, the invitations, the praise, what's left of us? His fingers loosened. He said nothing. That's what I thought, she whispered. She pulled free and opened the doors. The sound of music and laughter swallowed her as she stepped back into the light. Nate remained on the balcony, the echo of her words hanging between the stars and the sea. He could see her across the ballroom now, speaking with Dr. Sira Indiaye, laughter spilling easily from her like air released after years of being held. Cameras caught the moment, immortalizing it in pixels that would soon travel farther than he ever could. From where he stood, she looked untouchable. Not because of the dress, not because of the crowd, but because she had stopped needing to be seen through him. He watched as the Contessa joined them, placing a hand on Amara's shoulder, introducing her to another circle of scholars. Applause rose again, this time spontaneous, genuine. Amara's smile bloomed like dawn. On the balcony, Nate stared at his reflection in the glass. The man looking back wasn't a visionary or a savior. He was a curator of illusions, and his gallery was emptying fast. Inside, Amara lifted a glass, golden under the chandelier's glow. Her laughter, carried through the open doors, reached him like a verdict. It wasn't cruel. It was free. And in that sound, Nate Whitaker finally understood the difference between optics and oxygen. He had built his world to be seen. She had finally remembered how to breathe. The morning after the gala arrived without mercy. Sunlight spilled through the glass walls of the penthouse like an accusation, slicing through what was left of the night. Nate was still asleep in the guest room, a silent retreat after words neither of them could take back. The city outside stirred, oblivious to the quiet collapse happening in the sky above it. Amara stood in the kitchen barefoot, clutching a cup of coffee she didn't taste. Her gown from the night before hung over a chair, its bronze folds still shimmering faintly, as though remembering the light that had adored it. Every time she looked at it, she felt a strange mixture of pride and grief, like a soldier staring at her own battle armor after surviving the war. Her phone buzzed, a message from Lucia Romano. "Your photo is everywhere. They're calling you the woman who redefined the gala." Amara opened the link. There she was, standing beneath the chandelier, gold against marble, eyes unflinching. The image had already circled the world overnight. Articles flooded the feed. A scholar in firelight. The new face of heritage. Dr. Amara Collins. A voice unveiled. And beneath the celebration, another current. Whispers about Nate Whitaker's remarkable partner, who had stolen his spotlight. The internet, as always, sensed blood and narrative in equal measure. She set the phone down, her heart quiet but certain. The photo wasn't fame, it was evidence, proof that she existed in color, not grayscale. Proof that she had finally become visible, not curated. From down the hall came the sound of movement. Nate appeared, impeccable, even in unraveling. His tie was gone, but his composure was ironed back into place. "We need to talk," he said. Amara didn't answer. She poured herself another cup instead, the silence daring him to fill it. He did. "You made quite an impression last night. I noticed. You hijacked the event. Do you understand how this looks?" She met his eyes. "Yes, honest." He exhaled sharply, pacing. "You think this is power? Being the subject of gossip? They'll use you for headlines and move on. I was trying to protect you from that kind of scrutiny." "You were protecting your reflection," she said. "You can't polish someone else into invisibility and call it love." "Amara, don't," she interrupted softly. "You've said enough. I just didn't know until last night that every time you said we, you really meant you." The quiet that followed was not peace. It was the sound of gravity changing direction. Finally, Nate straightened. "You're emotional. Take the day. We'll regroup. But I expect you at dinner tonight. Optics matter more than ever." Amara smiled faintly, almost tenderly. "You really don't see it, do you? There's no we left to regroup." He stared at her, disbelief flickering across his face like static. "You're serious." "As oxygen," she said, "and I can't breathe here anymore." An hour later, she was in her study. Sunlight pooled across stacks of papers and open books, the remnants of the woman she'd tried to remember. She pulled a small leather bag from the closet and began to pack. Not much. Her passport, her grandmother's gold chain, her laptop, a few handwritten notes on the memory beneath the marble thesis. The essentials of a life that could be rebuilt. When she opened the drawer of the writing desk, a small envelope slipped out. Inside was a note, written in careful script. "For when you decide to stop surviving and start returning to yourself. S. Severine." The housekeeper who had always moved like smoke, seeing everything, saying nothing. Amara blinked back tears as she unfolded the paper further. Tucked inside were photocopies of bank statements, passwords, account numbers, accounts in her name that she hadn't known existed. Severine had been saving the stipends Nate's assistant transferred monthly for household expenses. Quiet rebellion disguised as loyalty. Amara's throat tightened. There had always been women like Severine, watchers, whisperers, guardians who helped others escape gilded cages. A message pinged on her laptop. Flight confirmation. Nice to Florence. Departure 2005. Professor Elias Chang had already acted on her email. The symposium in Florence was in 3 days. Sira Njai would be there, along with curators and scholars from across Europe. They had reserved a seat for her, not in the audience, but on the stage. The decision crystallized like glass cooling into form. It wasn't flight, it was trajectory. By afternoon, Nate was gone. Meetings, optics, damage control. The penthouse was finally still. Amara left a note on the counter, short and clean. Thank you for the introduction to your world. I've decided to find mine again. She placed her apartment key beside it. As she walked through the hallway one last time, she ran her hand along the cool marble wall, the same surface she'd once admired as elegance. Now it just felt cold. Outside, the city blazed with late light. The harbor shimmered. Gulls wheeled overhead. Amara hailed a taxi, the garment bag resting beside her like a co-conspirator. Through the window, she watched Monaco recede, the terraces, the palaces, the facades that had mistaken silence for grace. When the driver asked where she was headed, she said simply, "Nice station." He nodded. "Quick escape?" Amara smiled softly. "Long time coming." The train station smelled of iron and possibility. She bought a ticket to Florence without hesitation, her hand steady as she slid the euros across the counter. On the platform, she caught her reflection in the glass of the waiting train, hair loose, eyes clear. No longer the woman rehearsed for display. The train whistle sounded, sharp, alive. As it pulled away from the coast, the sea appeared again, following her like a promise. For the first time in years, there was no plan curated by anyone else. No calendar entries written in another's voice. Just motion, forward and fierce. The horizon opened like a door. Somewhere between Monaco and Florence, Amara Collins began to breathe in full sentences again. Florence greeted her like an old song rediscovered, sunlight spilling down sandstone facades, bells tolling from churches that had outlasted empires. The city smelled of dust and espresso, the kind of scent that whispered, "Creation happens here." Every alley was a corridor between centuries. Every shadow carried memory. Amara stepped from the cab in front of the Palazzo Vecchio, suitcase in one hand, garment bag in the other. A banner flapped above the grand doors. Riviera Heritage Symposium, the memory of stone. The same words that had once been printed on invitations Nate curated and gatekept. Now they belonged to her. Inside, marble stairs rose toward the Great Hall, where scholars, curators, and journalists were already gathering. Conversations in Italian, French, and English braided through the air like a tapestry. She recognized none of the faces, and yet, every pair of eyes that turned toward her seemed to hold a faint flicker of recognition. The viral image from the gala had crossed borders faster than she had. Dr. Sira Njai was waiting near the podium, wrapped in a navy caftan embroidered with gold. Her smile was the kind that disarmed and dissected all at once. "Amara Collins," she said, embracing her with the ease of kin. "You walked through fire and arrived luminous." Amara laughed softly, though her throat tightened. "I almost didn't." "Then we would have been poorer for it," Sira said. "Your paper, your courage, shifted the conversation before you even stepped in the room." A staffer approached, handing Amara her name badge. Beneath her title it read, "Guest Lecturer, Diasporic Architecture and Cultural Memory." Her pulse skipped. The words "guest lecturer" gleamed like proof that she'd crossed some invisible line between silence and voice. As the panel began, Amara sat beside Sira and two others, a Greek preservationist and a French historian. When the moderator introduced her, polite applause rippled through the hall. Microphones waited in front of each speaker like truth detectors. Sira opened with her signature precision. "For too long, Europe has called itself the architect of civilization," she said, her voice measured and magnetic. "But civilization is not ownership, it's inheritance. We all build with borrowed hands." The audience murmured approval. Then it was Amara's turn. Her heart beat steady, not from fear but from purpose. She adjusted the microphone. The sound that filled the speakers was clear, resonant. "I study architecture," she began, "but what I really study is absence. What was taken, what was renamed, what was forgotten." The room stilled. She continued, "When I walk through Mediterranean cathedrals, I see Moorish arches shaped by African geometry. I see carved ceilings whose patterns mirror the textiles of Mali. But in the guidebooks, the words are always the same. Inspired by Eastern design. Inspired, as if stolen ideas woke themselves into being." The audience leaned forward, cameras clicked, but she barely noticed. "We talk about preservation," Amara said, But who decides what's worth preserving? We polish marble, but not memory. We save stone, not story. Her voice wavered for a fraction of a second, not from weakness, but from truth cutting too close. For years, I stopped speaking about this because someone told me the world preferred simplicity. That being palatable was safer than being visible. A silence spread, heavy, reverent. But silence, she said finally, is a kind of architecture too. It builds walls between us and our power, and I'm done living inside those walls. The applause rose slowly at first, then rolled through the hall like thunder. Even the panelists clapped. Sira reached for her hand and squeezed it once. Solidarity disguised as affection. After the session, journalists surrounded her. Lucia Romano had flown in to cover the symposium. She smiled behind her camera lens. "You just cracked the foundation," Lucia said. "Everyone's quoting you already." Amara exhaled, half in disbelief. "It doesn't feel real." "It's not supposed to," Lucia said. "Revolutions never do on their first day." Later, in the green room, Amara stood before a tall mirror trimmed in gold leaf. Her reflection stared back, steady, radiant, unfamiliar only in how sure she looked. The dress she wore was simple this time. Cream linen, elegant, untouched by performance. The woman inside it needed no armor. She thought of Nate's words. "They'll use you for headlines and move on." Maybe they would, but tonight the headline was hers, and the story belonged to truth, not optics. Sira entered quietly. "The Contessa was watching online," she said. "She sends congratulations. And an invitation. Marseille wants you for a residency." Amara smiled faintly. "The world does move quickly." "Not the world," Sira said. You are finally moving at your own speed." That evening, the symposium hosted a small dinner on a terrace overlooking the Arno. Golden light washed over the city. The river shimmered like molten glass. Laughter and debate flowed easily. Amara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Belonging without compromise. At one point, Sira raised her glass. "To Amara," she said, "for proving that when a woman tells her truth, the architecture of the world shifts to make room." The guests clinked glasses. Amara's cheeks warmed. "I just told the story the marble couldn't," she replied. Across the table, Lucia grinned. "And you did it beautifully. Half of Europe's art world is on fire." Amara looked out over the river as night gathered its shadows. "Good," she said softly. "Maybe it's time the fire burned where it should." For the first time, she wasn't thinking of what came next. She wasn't rehearsing, defending, or shrinking. The woman reflected in the glass before her was complete. Not the curated ornament Nate once presented to the world, but the architect of her own future. And somewhere deep inside, she felt the echo of her own words at the microphone earlier. "We polish marble, but not memory." Tonight, she had done both. And when the stars rose over Florence, Amara Collins finally understood. She hadn't escaped her old life. She had outgrown it. For 3 days, Florence burned bright around her. Interviews, photographs, invitations. The world wanted a piece of her light. Amara accepted each moment with grace, though a quiet awareness coiled beneath it. Attention is never free. Admiration has a half-life. The headlines called her the architect of memory. Social feeds overflowed with her quotes from the symposium. "We polish marble, but not memory. Silence builds walls too." The words were everywhere, paired with images of her standing against golden stone, unflinching. Then, on the fourth morning, the tone shifted. A new article appeared online, sleek, venomous, anonymous. "When identity politics corrupts heritage," the problem with Dr. Collins. It accused her of academic opportunism, of turning scholarship into spectacle. The piece dissected her appearance, her tone, her aggressive self-promotion. It ended with a phrase that made her chest tighten. "Those who mistake personal trauma for cultural truth endanger objectivity and history itself." Within hours, smaller blogs echoed it. Then came the social media swarm. Faceless accounts calling her divisive, ungrateful, too angry for academia. By noon, she stopped checking notifications. Her phone trembled on the table like a small, frightened animal. She knew Nate's signature even when he tried to hide it. The phrasing was his, the cadence of control. the weaponization of intellect. It was the same voice that once told her, "I'm protecting you." Now it hissed from behind editorial anonymity. Sierra found her sitting on the steps of the palazzo courtyard, sunlight catching the uneaten croissant beside her. "They'll come for you," Sierra said gently. "They always come for women who rewrite the script. But you don't owe them your silence again." Amara looked up, eyes steady but tired. "He's behind it. I can feel it." Sierra didn't argue. "Then let him show his hand. Truth has a longer memory than noise." By afternoon, Lucia arrived at her hotel room with her camera bag and fury in her eyes. "We traced the article," she said. "A PR firm in London. Guess who's their primary client?" Amara exhaled. "Nate." Lucia nodded. "He hired them to plant counter-narratives. Classic crisis management. His foundation's donors didn't like being upstaged. Amara felt the old tremor of fear, the muscle memory of submission. But it passed. "So he's still trying to curate the story." "Then give them a story they can't control," Lucia said, setting her camera on the table. "We're publishing everything. The truth, the emails, the edits, every piece of how he tried to erase you." For a moment, Amara hesitated. She wasn't vengeful by nature, but this wasn't vengeance. It was evidence. She opened her laptop, her fingers steady. Within minutes, she began a thread that would travel farther than Nate's team could reach. For those asking about the noise, transparency is its own armor. Here's what actually happened. She attached screenshots, his revisions of her paper, the contract clauses that tried to claim her intellectual property, the anonymous op-ed's phrasing mirrored in his old emails. She wrote with precision, not anger. When control fails, abusers call it instability. When the silenced speak, they call it spectacle. Within an hour, her thread caught fire. Thousands shared it. Other women in academia chimed in, sharing their own stories of men who had edited their voices out of their work. The narrative shifted again, this time in her favor, not by force, but by truth told without apology. Lucia watched as the numbers climbed. "You just turned backlash into blueprint," she said quietly. Amara smiled faintly. "No," she said. "I just stopped whispering." That evening, her inbox filled with messages, some from strangers, some from women she hadn't spoken to in years. One read, "You gave me language for something I couldn't name." Another, "Your voice made me remember mine." But among them was one that made her heart falter. From Nathaniel Whitaker. Subject, "We need to talk." She opened it. "You've made this impossible. My reputation is collapsing. Investors are withdrawing. I never meant for it to go this far. Let's meet, privately. We can fix this together." The word "together" landed like a shard of glass. Even now, he still believed in ownership disguised as partnership. She didn't reply. Instead, she forwarded the email to Lucia and Sierra, then closed her laptop. Outside, Florence was alive with twilight. Orange light bleeding into blue, the Arno reflecting everything and hiding nothing. Sierra joined her on the balcony, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "To the ones who try to bury us," she said. Amara clinked her glass. "They never learned that seeds and graves look the same until spring." They drank in silence for a while, watching the city breathe. Below them, a violinist played near the Ponte Vecchio, his song mournful and defiant. The next morning, international outlets picked up the story. The Guardian, Le Monde, The Atlantic. Headlines shifted from scandal to reckoning. "When erasure fights back, women of academia demand accountability." The backlash that had once threatened to drown her became a movement she hadn't planned but instinctively led. Nate tried to apologize publicly a week later, a carefully worded statement about miscommunication and regret. But the world had already moved on without him. His foundation's board requested his resignation. His PR firm deleted the post it had seeded. Silence for once became his punishment. Amara, meanwhile, received an email from the Dakar Museum, an offer for a fellowship and exhibition. Attached was a single line from Sierra. "Come build something no one can rewrite." Amara stared at the screen, feeling the echo of her own words return to her. "We save stone, not story." It was time to build both. As the bells of Florence rang across the evening sky, she looked at her reflection in the hotel mirror. No trace of apology, no tremor of fear, just a woman shaped by storm and steel, spine straight, eyes steady. The world had tried to shrink her, and she'd expanded instead. And when she whispered, "Never again," it wasn't a vow, it was history correcting itself. The meeting room in Monaco was colder than she remembered. The air conditioning hummed like a warning, the marble table gleamed with sterile precision, and the view from the window, once breathtaking, now felt like an exhibit in a museum of captivity. Amara sat at one end, her hands folded, calm as tidewater before the storm. Across from her, Nate waited, flanked by two lawyers in tailored suits who looked like they'd been trained never to blink. His expression was composed, polished, performative, as if even this confrontation were a public event he could spin. "You didn't have to make this adversarial," he said, voice low, the same tone he used to soothe shareholders. "We could have resolved this quietly." Amara's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman from Marseille, didn't flinch. "You mean privately," she said. "The difference is significant." Nate exhaled, fingers steepling. "Amara, we had a life. I built a foundation meant for both of us. You're dismantling it." Amara's voice was even. "You built a cage and called it a home. I'm just naming it correctly." He looked at her then, really looked, perhaps for the first time. She was dressed simply, a navy suit, hair pulled back, no adornment except the small gold chain her grandmother had given her. No armor, no performance. Just truth, sharpened to precision. The lawyer slid a document across the table. "These are the terms. Dr. Collins seeks the immediate release of all intellectual property, papers, research drafts, and materials in her name. She retains sole authorship and ownership. Mr. Whitaker will issue a written acknowledgement of her authorship and withdraw all prior claims." Nate's jaw tightened. "That research was done under our shared funding, our shared life." Amara met his gaze. "My mind isn't marital property, Nate." A small, strangled silence filled the room. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Our client is also willing to offer a financial settlement," he said carefully, sliding a second document forward. Amara didn't touch it. "I don't want your money." "Then what do you want?" Nate asked, the frustration leaking through the veneer. She leaned forward, her tone quiet but undeniable. "For you to tell the truth. No PR statements, no euphemisms. You will retract every false claim your firm planted. You'll apologize, not to me, but to the women you taught to doubt themselves when you called your control protection." Nate looked startled, then wary. "That's excessive." "Honest," she corrected. "It's just honest." Her lawyer added, "And there will be no non-disclosure agreement. Dr. Collins has the right to speak freely about her experience." Nate's composure cracked, faint but visible. "You're destroying my career." "I'm ending your monopoly on the story," she said. "You can rebuild if you learn how to do it without burying people." He looked away, jaw clenched. For a moment, he seemed smaller. Not the towering figure who'd once defined every room, but a man realizing he'd built his empire on quicksand. The lawyers began to negotiate the finer details, but Amara barely heard them. Her focus drifted to the window behind Nate. Outside, the harbor glittered in late afternoon light. Boats swayed on the tide, untethered, unafraid of movement. Freedom, she realized, was never about escape. It was about reclaiming direction. After an hour, the meeting concluded. Papers were signed. Hands were shaken with reluctant civility. Nate lingered as the others gathered their things. "You really won," he said, almost in disbelief. Amara stood, slipping her pen into her bag. "I didn't come here to win," she said softly. "I came to stop losing." He studied her, searching for a trace of the woman he'd once shaped, softened, managed, but she wasn't there anymore. There was only this version, whole, unflinching, untranslatable. When she reached the door, he said quietly, "I did love you, you know." Amara paused, not turning back. "Maybe you did," she said, "but love isn't ownership. It's respect dressed as choice." And then she walked out. Outside, the Riviera light struck her face, too bright, too alive. She stood for a moment on the steps of the courthouse, breathing in air that tasted different, realer. She hadn't realized how long she'd been holding her breath until now. Lucia waited nearby with her camera slung over her shoulder. "How did it go?" Amara smiled, small but certain. "It's done." Lucia raised an eyebrow. "You look like someone who just signed a peace treaty." Amara shook her head. "Freedom isn't peace, it's work. But it's work I can finally call mine." They walked together down the narrow street, sunlight slicing between buildings. Every sound seemed amplified: the laughter of a child, the distant bell, the rhythm of footsteps that belonged entirely to her. Later, in her hotel room, she sat by the window overlooking the port. A folder lay open on her desk, legal papers on one side, the latest draft of her manuscript on the other. The title glowed on the screen: "The Memory Beneath the Marble, Reclaiming the Unseen Hands of History." Her reflection in the glass looked calm, almost serene. The scars in her story were still there, but they'd become architecture, supporting beams rather than fractures. Her phone buzzed once. A new email. From Oxford University Press. Subject: Publication proposal. Urgent. She stared at it for a long moment, then smiled, quiet and unshaken. Outside, the horizon was molten gold. The city hummed below her, but she no longer belonged to it, or to any place that required permission. Her freedom had terms, yes, but this time, she'd written everyone herself. And somewhere in that simple truth, the world, at last, felt like hers again. The air in Dakar tasted like sun-warm's salt and possibility. Even before the plane landed, Amara could feel the difference. A gravity that pulled her inward instead of holding her down. The city was rhythm and color, memory and movement. Where Monaco had polished itself into stillness, Dakar breathed. The Museum of Civilization's noirs stood like a hymn in glass and stone, circular and vast, built on the idea that time didn't need straight lines to make sense. When Amara first walked through its doors, the light cut across the atrium like water over gold. Dr. Sira Ndiaye was waiting, hands open, smile radiant. "Welcome home," she said simply. Amara exhaled. "I didn't know I was coming home." "You did," Sira said. "Your work was always headed here." In the weeks that followed, Amara built her rhythm again. Not the fevered pace of survival, but the steady pulse of creation. She spent her mornings in the archives, cataloging fragments of forgotten architecture, hand-sketched blueprints, oral histories, carvings that carried entire genealogies in their lines. She called her new initiative the Literal Archive, a digital and physical space dedicated to mapping the unseen influence of African design across the world's coastlines. At first, it was just her and a handful of young researchers, artists, coders, historians, each with a story that had been almost erased. They called her Professor Amara and listened the way people listen to someone who has walked through fire and come back with a map. "Every wall tells a story," she told them during their first workshop, "but only if we learn to hear it. Every pattern, every stone, every shadow has fingerprints." Her words traveled far beyond the museum's walls. A clip from her lecture, filmed by one of her students, spread across social media, her voice steady, her hands drawing invisible connections in the air. "We are not restoring what was lost," she said. "We are remembering what was stolen, and memory is the work that remakes the world." The video was shared millions of times. Artists quoted it, activists stitched it into their speeches, and students painted it on classroom walls. Emails flooded in, universities asking her to lecture, journalists requesting interviews, women writing to thank her for showing them that scholarship could look like reclamation, not obedience. Still, for all the noise, Amara found her peace in quiet hours, in the sound of rain on the museum's glass dome, in the laughter of her students as they uncovered another forgotten craftsman's name. She began to understand that healing wasn't a single moment of triumph. It was a discipline, a daily choice to build something instead of breaking yourself to fit someone else's blueprint. One evening, as the sun fell into the Atlantic, she walked along the museum terrace with Sira. The ocean below glowed copper under the dying light. "You've done in months what others couldn't in years," Sira said. Amara smiled faintly. "Because I had nothing left to prove. Just something to give." Sira studied her. "Do you ever think of him?" Amara took a long breath. "Sometimes. but not with anger. He taught me what erasure looks like, and because of that, I know what visibility truly means. Sira nodded, quiet admiration in her eyes. You turned pain into architecture. Amara laughed softly. Maybe that's the only kind worth building, the kind born from what we refuse to let disappear. Months later, the Literal Archive opened its first exhibition in Marseille, a collaboration between Amara's team and the Contessa's Foundation. The title, Inheritance in Motion. The gallery was alive with sound, waves, footsteps, whispered stories recorded in dozens of languages. Sculptures of coral and brass stood beside digital projections of ancient mosques and colonial mansions, each annotated with their hidden origins. In the center stood a single installation, a bronze staircase suspended in midair, its steps engraved with names of artisans who had built empires without ever being credited. At its base, a plaque read, "History remembers the architects. Memory remembers the builders." When Amara stepped to the podium that night, the crowd quieted. She wore indigo and gold, Kemi's design, evolved but unmistakable. "I once thought freedom was distance," she began, "running from the places that tried to contain me. But I've learned that freedom is return. It's standing on the same ground and refusing to vanish." Applause swelled, soft but profound. She continued, "For too long we've treated beauty as proof of power. But true beauty, the kind born from struggle and survival, is proof of persistence. Every culture represented here tonight exists because someone refused to forget." Lucia's camera clicked softly from the front row, tears glinting behind the lens. Sira smiled from the sidelines, arms folded, the quiet pride of a mentor watching the inevitable unfold. Amara paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "This archive isn't about the past," she said. "It's a map to the future, one built on truth, compassion, and memory that cannot be rewritten." When she stepped down from the stage, applause chased her like a tide. Outside, the night air was thick with salt and promise. She walked along the pier, wind tugging at her dress, the world she'd rebuilt humming inside her chest. In her pocket was a folded letter, the first draft of her upcoming book contract, the title the same as her exhibition. Oxford had offered her full creative control, no edits without consent, no ownership clauses. For the first time, her work would bear only her name. She stopped at the edge of the pier, watching the reflection of the moon tremble on the water. Somewhere behind her, she could hear her students laughing, the echo of possibility. Amara whispered to the waves, "We are not fragments, we are foundations." And as the ocean breathed against the shore, she realized the truth she'd been writing all along. The most radical form of survival isn't escape, it's creation. And creation, in the hands of the once erased, is the work that remakes the world. Monte Carlo shimmered again, but this time, Amara did not arrive as an ornament to someone else's story. She stepped from the car into the same marble square where she had once felt invisible, and the cameras that once glanced past her now turned in reverence. The International Conference on Mediterranean Memory had chosen the Opera House for its closing keynote, and the banners outside bore her name in bold lettering, Dr. Amara Collins, the architecture of return. Inside, the chandeliers burned with familiar light, but the air was different, alive, expectant. Rows of scholars, journalists, and students filled the velvet seats. The Contessa sat near the front beside Sira Ndiaye and Lucia Romano. Kemi Balogun had flown in from Nice, wearing a dress cut from the same bronze fabric as Amara's gown years ago. Even the city, it seemed, was holding its breath. Backstage, Amara adjusted her headset microphone. Her reflection in the dressing room mirror caught her off guard, not because she looked different, but because she finally recognized herself. There was no trace of apology in her face, no remnants of someone else's framing. Only the certainty of a woman who had survived erasure and turned it into evidence. When she stepped onto the stage, the applause rose in waves. It wasn't polite, it was thunder. She smiled, waited, and then began. 3 years ago, I stood in this city feeling small, she said, voice steady, resonant. I had the right degrees, the right dress, the right silence, and still I was not seen. I thought the only way to survive was to shrink. But shrinking never saves you. It only teaches the world that you'll make yourself smaller to fit its comfort. The audience leaned in. Cameras captured every word. I learned that visibility isn't vanity. It's survival. When you speak, when you write, when you show up fully, even trembling, you create oxygen for others who've been told to hold their breath. She paused, scanning the crowd. Somewhere near the back, she thought she saw Nate. Not front row, not center stage, just a man among many. His expression was unreadable. It didn't matter anymore. My work today isn't about revenge, she continued. It's about restoration, of memory, of voice, of power. Because history isn't a fixed monument. It's a living thing that changes every time we tell the truth a little louder. Applause erupted again. Amara lifted her hand gently, inviting quiet. But truth without compassion is just noise. So here's what I've learned. Power is not the ability to silence others. Power is the courage to amplify what was never meant to be heard, and to do it with grace. Behind her, the stage screen shifted. Images appeared. Her students in Dakar, the literal archive installations, artisans' names etched into bronze steps, women gathered in workshops across continents. Each image pulsed with color and movement, the tangible proof that her voice had multiplied. This, Amara said softly, is what happens when you refuse to disappear. The audience rose in a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. Lucia captured it all, the light, the tears, the unstoppable sound of reclamation. When Amara finally stepped off stage, she found herself surrounded. Her students, her mentors, strangers who felt like kin. Sira hugged her fiercely. You didn't just rewrite your story, she said. You rewrote the way stories are told. Later, on the terrace overlooking the harbor, Amara stood alone for a moment. The sea below glittered with the same indifference it always had. But tonight, it felt like acknowledgement. She remembered her first night in Monaco, the same view, the same wind, but a different woman entirely. Back then she'd whispered, "Let them see me." Now, the world had. Lucia joined her, camera hanging at her side. Do you ever think about what comes next? Amara smiled, eyes on the horizon. Next isn't a place, she said. It's a purpose. They stood in silence, watching the city glow. The opera house behind them hummed with celebration. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks bloomed, gold and indigo, her colors reflected in the sky. Amara turned to Lucia, her voice low, almost reverent. We spend so much of our lives waiting for permission. But you know what I've learned? Lucia tilted her head. What? Amara's smile was small but certain. The world doesn't need your permission to underestimate you. So stop waiting for its approval to become who you are. Speak at full volume, even if your voice shakes. As the fireworks faded, Amara walked toward the railing. Below, the water rippled, endless and open. She pulled a notebook from her bag, the same one she'd carried since her flight from Monaco, and wrote a single line. Every woman who dares to be heard rebuilds the architecture of the world. She closed the book, lifted her face to the wind and whispered, "Let the next one rise." The sea answered in applause. If Amara's story found you, it's because somewhere inside you, a voice is waiting too. The one you've softened to survive. The one you've edited out to keep the peace. Don't. The world has enough silence. What it needs now are people brave enough to speak truth with compassion and live loudly without apology. Build what you wish existed. Write what they erased. Wear what they said would hide you. Love without shrinking. And when the moment comes, when you stand at your own edge between fear and freedom, remember Amara's words. Speak at full volume, even if your voice shakes,